Hey everybody, it's me, Steve Schnee, the CD Junkie. On this episode of CD Junkie, I'm going to be talking about Glen Campbell. Now, I'm not going to be talking about his whole career, but I'm going to be talking about the period that, me and my brother Mike followed him, that we were big, avid fans, and maybe go a little bit beyond that. So basically, the last 10 years that he was on Capitol, covering 67 to about 77, 78. Now, of course, I was into, the later Glen Campbell albums, but we're going to focus really on, the first part of his career. But before we get into that, I always like to talk about how I got into the band, and that's just my mom and dad were into Glen Campbell. So we were introduced to Glen Campbell at a very, very young age. We would watch Glen Campbell Good Time Hour on TV. We would see him on variety shows. It was also my first concert. I was 6 going on 7 when we saw him in 1970. So this was a year after True Grit. We had seen True Grit in the theater. That's how we became huge John Wayne fans, because we went there to see Glen Campbell and came out being John Wayne fans. So, but let's get started here on my stack of CDs. We're going to start with something here called The Early Years. And what this is this is a CD that sort of gathers together his basically pre-Capitol Records recordings, or maybe some of the independent things that he was doing outside of his Capitol Records contract. This includes some solo recordings from the early 60s, as well as things he recorded under pseudonyms. Like he recorded a single under the name Billy Dolton. He recorded a great raw rock instrumental under the band name The CGs, and this is before the Bee Gees. And he was in the Trophies, which is kind of like a doo-wop band, and the Fleas, and then he was in the Green River Boys, which was a bluegrass band. So this CD here compiles a lot of the stuff from that period. And now, he was putting out albums, mostly instrumental albums or even country-laced albums for Capitol, like this 1963 album. Now, I don't necessarily recommend this particular CD version. It's mastered from vinyl, isn't really cleaned up that well, but you do get a good idea of what he sounded like in 1963, sort of his more country edge before he went pop. Now, the big album, really the transitional album that he put out was in 1967 called Burning Bridges. It's never been released on CD, and I haven't even heard the whole album. In fact, I think it took me years to realize that he put out anything before Gentle on My Mind. I mean, remember, at that point, we got into him 4 or 5 years old. It wasn't until maybe my early teens that I realized he had this slew of stuff that had come out before he hit it big. Now, one of the things I want to show you, this is a recent CD, but it's called Glen Campbell Sings for the King. And as many people know, he was a member of the Wrecking Crew. He was in the Beach Boys. He was in Sagittarius. He was in a lot of projects. And one of the projects he would get involved with is songwriter Ben Weisman would write songs for Elvis's movies. Yes, Elvis Presley. And he would have Glenn sing the demos. So what we have here is Glen Campbell Sings for the King. These are the demos that he recorded specifically for Elvis to listen to. I was completely unaware of all these recordings until this CD came out, so it's really kind of exciting. So yes, it's great to hear some of those soundtracky Elvis songs with Glen Campbell's voice again. It's not everything that Elvis eventually recorded, but it's a good portion of this is, and it's a whole lot of fun. It doesn't sound exactly like his stuff, but Glen Campbell, just a great voice. That's the thing about Glen, great voice, great guitar player, great musician. He was just truly incredible. Now, like I said before, that Burning Bridges album, which has never been released on CD, that had a couple different producers like Al DeLory, Nick Venet, but Al DeLory sort of took over production for Glen Campbell, and that's really when he became this pop superstar. Now, this CD contains 2 albums from 1967, and while Gentle on My Mind is the big song on the first of the 2 albums, this introduced me and my brother to a lot of songs that we hadn't heard before, such as, Harry Nilsson's Without Her, and the song Mary in the Morning, and there's a song written by Jimmy Rogers called It's Over, which is not the same song that Roy Orbison recorded, but it's really actually great. It's a great album, great pop introduction to the talents of Glen Campbell. What a voice, what an amazing voice. Now, the second album on here is By the Time I Get to Phoenix, which if you haven't gone back and listened to that song, man, it's a heartbreaker, I'll tell you. But anyway, By the Time I Get to Phoenix features a song called Hey Little One, which, me and my brother picked up on pretty quickly. And that album was also released in 1967. Both these albums produced by Al DeLory. By the Time I Get to Phoenix does have, I think, a track or two produced by Nick Venet, but really fantastic. Now, remember when I mentioned the song Hey Little One? Well, the next year, he put out an album called Hey Little One, and that's the first album there. That album version of the song, it sounds like it may be slightly remixed, but it's still the same recording. I guess it must have been a really popular song, so they just carried it over and put it on his next album, which is kind of odd, but I'm not going to complain because it's a great record. Hey Little One also has Elusive Butterfly. I Want to Live is another favorite. And remember how I talked about the last album had It's Over by Jimmy Rogers? This is the album that has It's Over by Roy Orbison. So they're not the same song, obviously. That same year, New Place in the Sun, songs that we immediately were drawn to on this album from 1968 include Freeborn Man and Legend of Bonnie and Clyde. Legend of Bonnie and Clyde, of course, is the Merle Haggard song. Interesting thing is I don't always remember everything, as it came out. So I always thought that these albums came out after Galveston and after Wichita Lineman, but no, they were actually before. So that's just a little trick of my memory sort of messed up. But then after that album came another album that we were totally in love with. And that's the Glen Campbell and Bobby Gentry album right there. And this came out in 1968 also. Let me see. Less of Me is a song written by Glen Campbell. There's another song on the other side that started out side 2 that was written by Bobby Gentry. Most of these tracks they duet on. Now here's my memory playing tricks on me again. We had the single All I Have to Do Is Dream that they did, and I love their version. But it wasn't on the album. And for years I always thought it was, but I guess it was just a single, and we used to play the single all the time. Again, I don't remember everything, but I remember listening to it over and over again. But on this 2 for CD here, they did add All I Have to Do Is Dream as a bonus track. And I'll talk about the other album on this in just a few moments. Now, at the end of 1968, he released That Christmas Feeling, which is my favorite Christmas album of all time. I've talked about it in other videos. I won't talk about it here, but I will tell you that it is absolutely stellar. It's wonderful. It's my favorite Christmas album. And if you love the 60s hits of Glen Campbell, you're going to love that Christmas album. So if you ever find it in the used bins or you need to order it online, please do so. It's very much worth your while. Also in 1968 was the album Wichita Lineman, if you can see it there. That album introduced us to songs like If You Go Away. I mean, it's got Dreams of the Everyday Housewife, which is incredible. You Better Sit Down, Kids, which was a song written by Sonny Bono. And of course, the song Wichita Lineman. Listen to that song again right now. His voice is so pure and beautiful and wonderful. And the song, of course, is amazing. So anyway, that was 1968. So he put out a lot of stuff in 1968. So I think it was almost time for Burnout. But in 1969, out came Galveston. Now, still, to this day, all these albums are produced by Al DeLore. Galveston, of course, apart from the title track, it also includes Take My Hand for a While, Where's the Playground Susie, which I believe they retitled the album in the UK, Where's the Playground Susie. And it's also even got a song called Every Time I Itch, I Wind Up Scratching You, which is another Glen Campbell favorite. So that's another stellar release featuring 2 great Glen Campbell albums. And like I said before, my dad took me and my brother to go see True Grit and turned us into John Wayne fans. Love that movie to this day. I just watched it a few weeks ago. Still love it. Now, the soundtrack album did come out, and it did come out on CD, but I happened to get the limited edition version. And the reason I got the limited edition version, first off, I loved the score, which was Elmer Bernstein. But it's also got some Glen Campbell recordings that were never released. Like the movie version of True Grit that opens the movie is different. And it also features an alternate demo on like acoustic guitar and harmonica. And then there's another song called Go Home Girl, which is another acoustic guitar song. It was written by John Hartford, who wrote Gentle on My Mind and played with Glen Campbell. And also there was a song called The Eyes of the Young, which was the original lyrics to True Grit. So very, very interesting, really fantastic. This is a must-have CD. If all you can find is the regular soundtrack, it's still great, but this is absolutely wonderful. Now, on the original soundtrack, I think they actually feature the single version of True Grit. This does feature the single version of True Grit at the end, but it has the movie version, which is a completely different recording. Still same song structure. It's just more cinematic. Now, Glen Campbell Live came out in 1969. Big fans of that. I don't own that on CD because I usually don't buy live albums. But when I finally decided I wanted to buy the live version of this album here, it turned out that it's like super expensive right now on CD. So I'll do without it for now. But moving forward, still working with Al DeLory, in 1970, out comes the album Try a Little Kindness, which Try a Little Kindness is my top 5 Glen Campbell songs. That's the title track to this, but I have to admit, there's not a lot of memories I have about this album. I mean, the album's great now, you know, when I listen to it. It's also got Honey Come Back, so I must have listened to it quite a bit. But I kind of don't remember that cover. Maybe my parents only bought the singles from that album and didn't buy the actual original album. I'm not sure. Now, his next album, also in 1970, was an album called Oh Happy Day, which I don't believe is on CD, and it's one of his religious albums. I sure hope that eventually that does come out on CD, because it's classic Glen Campbell. And also in 1970 was the Norwood soundtrack. This paired him with Kim Darby, who was in True Grit, and it wasn't a great movie at all. It was the movie debut of Joe Namath, so he's in the movie as well. Half the original album was new Glen Campbell songs written by Mac Davis, and the rest were score by Al DeLory. Now, the songs that I remember from that soundtrack were Me and My Guitar, which I don't think has appeared on any CD yet, but there's a great song in there called Everything a Man Could Ever Need, and that is on a couple compilations, and I'll show you those in just a little while. Fantastic songs, and it harkens back to sort of that Gentle on My Mind feel to it. Really fantastic. Also in 1970 is the Glen Campbell Good Time album. And again, do I remember owning that? I'm really not too sure, but that has It's Only Make Believe and MacArthur Park, and I'm very familiar with those, so I must have owned it. I guess my memory in the 70s, I guess I must have been on drugs, or maybe I switched from milk to chocolate milk or something. I don't know, but I don't remember these albums as well as the other ones. Now, as an adult, I listen to them a lot, and they are all fine, wonderful Glen Campbell albums. He just wasn't having the hits anymore. And to round out this CD is The Last Time I Saw Her. I'm 99% sure we never owned that. But then again, his version of Dream Baby, I'm very familiar with it. So my mom and dad must have played a single or something, because I know that I've never owned this album, or at least not that I remember. And again, it's still a fine example of Glen Campbell in the early 70s. So there's a CD with all 3 of those albums. Now, also in 1972 was an album called The Artistry of Glen Campbell. It was a 2-record album that you could only get through the Glen Campbell fan club. Record 1 was basically B-sides and I think some tracks that had never been released before. Disc 2 was all instrumentals. So I never even knew of this album's existence until the internet came along. So it's really kind of interesting to stumble across. It's never been released on CD, but a few songs have, and I'll get to those in a little bit. By this time, the hits weren't coming, so Glen Campbell and his label must have thought he needed a change. He was starting to chart higher in the country charts, so they switched to producer Jimmy Bowen, and he basically started catering towards the country crowd. So like this album, Glen Travis Campbell, which I know that we had when we were kids, came out in 1972. I Knew Jesus Before He Was a Star. Features a great version of If Not For You, the Bob Dylan song. And then I Remember Hank Williams, which is obviously a Hank Williams covers album. That was released in 1973. Fine examples of Glen Campbell moving away from pop. He was still very poppy, but sort of looking towards the country market and, hoping to sell a few records that way. In 1974, he came out with an album called Houston, or Houston, I'm Coming to See You, which I don't believe has ever been released on CD in its entirety, but I do have some songs on compilations, so I can't really tell you too much about that album because I really don't remember it. I don't think that we bought it. I think by that time we had moved on to Jackson 5, The Osmonds, Partridge Family, things like that. Also in 1974, he recorded an album that was either produced or arranged by Jimmy Webb, and that album was called Reunion, the songs of Jimmy Webb. This is an Australian version. Now, there are 2 songs on this that are not written by Jimmy Webb. One of them is called Roll Me Easy, which is written by Lyle George, and About the Ocean, which was written by Susan Webb. But this particular Australian version, it contains bonus tracks that were either written or arranged later by Jimmy Webb. So there's bonus tracks on this. I believe this may have been released on its own on Capitol in the US, but I don't own that CD. 1975, out came an album called Ernie Sings and Glenn Picks, which was Tennessee Ernie Ford singing and Glenn providing the guitar. Never heard this album. I vaguely knew of its existence, and I searched for it on CD later on, and I was never able to find it, so I'm not really sure if it's been released on CD. Now, after all that stuff produced by Jimmy Bowen, he started aiming for the pop charts again, and out came, of course, 1975, Rhinestone Cowboy. And this was produced by Dennis Lambert and Brian Potter. You know, it's more poppy. I say closer to adult contemporary, very pop, some soul influences, really, really great collection of songs. Of course, everybody knows the song Rhinestone Cowboy. That's kind of what he's known for these days, apart from Wichita Lineman and stuff. But there's another song in here called Country Boy, You've Got Your Feet in L.A., which was just kind of the same subject matter, but just in a different song. But the album does contain a lot of really cool tracks. So, you know, don't discount Rhinestone Cowboy. Now, there's a version of Rhinestone Cowboy that came out about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, that I failed to buy, and that's on my list of things that I really want to find. It's just been kind of hard to locate lately. After that album, another Lambert and Potter album came out called Bloodline, and that's there, right there. I guess he grew a beard to be more serious. But this has a great little medley that I remember buying on 7-inch. Don't Pull Your Love / Then You Can Tell Me Goodbye. You know, that Don't Pull Your Love is Don't Pull Your Love Out on Me, Baby. You know, again, that was aimed for the pop, but these were not lacking in country flavorings. So it was kind of teeter-tottering. It's mostly pop, but it was still country enough to where country radio would play it. And of course, as we know, country radio started evolving and became more commercial-oriented as opposed to that classic country and western sound. 1977, out comes the album Southern Nights. Incredible song. I love the song Southern Nights. That was another huge hit for him. And the album also contains a song called Sunflower, which is one of my favorite Glen Campbell songs, and it just happens to be written by Neil Diamond. So, you know, that's kind of like my mom's world and my dad's world combining, because my dad was more the Glen Campbell type guy. He's the guy who took us to the concert in 1970, and my mom was more the Neil Diamond person. I don't think the song was a big hit single. And then finally, there's an album called Basic that was produced by Glen Campbell and Tom Thacker. The only song I think that was a hit off of that was a song called Can You Fool. That brings to an end my Glen Campbell thing. Now, one thing I didn't tell you about is, basically because I forgot, I must have skipped it, is he did record an album with Anne Murray, and this came out in 1971. This is as she was on her way up, and he was on, I guess this is the real Star Is Born album. Like, the high point of this album is a duet, where she sings I Say a Little Prayer and he sings By the Time I Get to Phoenix. It was another interesting medley, but that came out in 1971 and I failed to tell you about it, so my apologies. So I want to touch on stuff real fast here. There is a box set, Glen Campbell, and it does span his entire career. It isn't all completely of this period. It does go beyond this because he did have another 30-something years of recordings after this. Here are the collections that I recommend. The Essential Glen Campbell, Volume 1, 2, and 3. These can all be found reasonably cheap on the internet. They are out of print. They're really actually great because each disc is in chronological order, but each disc doesn't contain all the big hits. So like on one of them, you're going to find Wichita Lineman and Galveston. Another one, you're going to find Gentle on My Mind, blah, 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 blah. Another one, you're going to find Southern Nights. So it's not chronological in terms of, you can buy one, it'll have all the hits on it. No, they're spread out between the three. And there's rarities. Remember I told you about that album called Artistry of Glen Campbell, which was a fan club only? There's a couple songs from that here. There's a couple unreleased live tracks. It's really, really a great collection if you buy all three, and you get a really nice overview of his entire career. But if you want to stick to just one package that's going to cover everything that I talked about right now, you're going to want to get Glen Campbell, The Capital Years, and this does cover everything that I talked about here. It's probably the best 2 CD collection on the market. It has all the big hits, rarities, and so much more. This is easily available, really great price. You can probably find it on the internet now, so I would recommend you to go buy this. It's called Glen Campbell, The Capital Years, which ironically are the years that I just essentially covered. Anyway, that's it for me. I really appreciate you hanging out with me while I talk about Glen Campbell. Remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, to ring that bell for future notifications, leave a comment, and until the next time, remember me. I'm Steve Schnee, the CD Junkie.